There's a real temptation to compare Astro Boy Omega Factor to any number of Mega Man games, if for no other reason than the base plot similarities. In fact, it's widely believed that Mega Man was heavily influenced by the original Astro Boy manga and anime series, so it would be pretty easy to assume that in making a Game Boy Advance game, they would take the Mega Man approach. Astro Boy would work extremely well in that sort of context. But Astro Boy Omega Factor takes a far braver approach. It's much closer to a beat-em-up. You get to a screen, beat up a ton of enemies, and then you go to the next screen. It's not like Mega Man at all. Now, because of their very linear nature, there are a few very rigidly defined things that beat-em-ups need in order to be really good. And the first is a real diverse selection of attacks that the player character can perform. And obviously that's kinda difficult on the Game Boy Advance, but you don't want to be just punching and kicking through the entire game. You want to be able to do more, and in all honesty, you want to be forced to do more. If the game doesn't ever really present you with a challenge that requires you to use the more unique attacks in your arsenal, then chances are you'll never actually use them. Astro Boy, however, does a fantastic job of keeping you trying new stuff. You'll have some basic melee and ranged attacks and a whole lot of combos involving them, and most importantly, an air dash that simultaneously functions as a dodge and helps to introduce a lot of the unique parts of this game's combat. Another very important element of a beat-em-up is enemy variety. I'm not just talking about enemy types, but also what they do. There's a decent number of different enemies in Astro Boy, and they all perform somewhat unique actions. A lot of them will just run up and try to punch you in the face, sure, but there are quite a few of them with unique ranged attacks that really force you to make use of the air dash quite a bit if you want to survive, and attack them in specific ways. Again, going back to our first point, enemies that force you to use a varied combat strategy. Graphically speaking, it can sometimes be a little weird since there will be normal-sized enemies and then just enormous, slightly more pixelated versions of the same enemies, and the fact that they just resize the exact same sprite is a little jarring. But otherwise, enemy variety, while not incredible, is certainly more than sufficient. You won't just be facing down hordes of faceless goons or anything like you'd see in a lot of other beat-em-ups. And Astro Boy also has a lot of variety outside the usual beat-em-up mold, in the form of airborne, endless side-scrolling levels and more traditional sort of Metroid-esque boss fights. It even has a leveling mechanic where you spend what basically amount to talent points and slowly increase your powers, something that's basically expected in any game these days, but was still sort of rare back then. And so the game ends up being this very interestingly unique specimen that is a whole lot better than a Mega Man clone probably would have been. And it surprised a lot of people when it first came out. Astro Boy has never really been particularly huge here in the West, and so not a lot of people were even familiar with it to begin with. If you really like brawlers, or engaging boss fights, or just want a fun portable game with a decently high skill ceiling, Astro Boy is a fantastic choice. One that does a whole lot more with the very limited number of buttons on the GBA than you would expect. In my retro reviews, I look at games that came out at least 10 years ago, what I would consider to be retro, and I see if they've held up today, if they're still worth playing now. If you like that idea, be sure to subscribe so you can see the latest videos. If you like this video in particular, be sure to hit that like button, and thanks for watching.